Our sermon series this fall, I hope you know at this point, is on the vision of Westminster. Open minds, open hearts. That is our vision. And we've been talking during the past 5 weeks about our 5 pillars, the ones that Steve mentioned in his Minute for Stewardship a moment ago. We are making a pivot this Sunday to our goals. You can see them listed in the bulletin insert in your Harbinger. Vision, 5 pillars, 3 goals: connect, serve, grow. Our sermon this morning focuses on the first goal, which is connection. Listen now to these words from John's Gospel, the 15th chapter, verses 1 through 5. If you'd like to follow along in your pew Bibles, you may do so on page 878. Let's all listen for God's word to us today. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. You have already been cleansed by the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you, just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Our number one goal for this year, and perhaps in the coming years, is connection. Why connection? You know why. Because when the pandemic hit Westminster, like every other church, we all began to feel disconnected, right? Disconnected from one another, disconnected from our church, maybe even disconnected from our faith. So if there is anything I hope for our congregation in the months to come, it is that each of you, in perhaps familiar ways and perhaps in new ways, will once again feel connected. Connected to one another, connected to Westminster, connected to our neighbors outside these walls, and connected to the God we know in Jesus Christ. Of course, the concept of connection is certainly not a new one. It's an old one. Jesus spoke about connection. On the last night of his life, he said to his disciples, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. What a beautiful image of connection. Christ is the vine, and we are the branches. Have you ever considered just how powerful connection can be? It's no small thing. The late great preacher Fred Craddock once told about the time that he was stranded in Canada by a surprise snowstorm. Everything shut down, no cars were on the road, but the bus depot remained open. The buses weren't going anywhere, but there was a cafe at the depot. So Dr. Craddock trudged through the snow to get to the depot, and upon opening the door, it appeared that every other stranded traveler had the same idea. That cafe was crowded with strangers wanting to get food and wanting to get warm. Well, Dr. Craddock sat down in a booth, and a man in a greasy apron came over to take his order. What'll you have? The man with the greasy apron said. May I see a menu? Dr. Craddock asked. What do you want a menu for? The man responded. We have soup. Well, what kinds of soup do you have? Soup. That's what we have. You want some soup? You know, I was just thinking soup sounded real good at 10 o'clock in the morning, Dr. Craddock said. Feels like a good morning for soup. So the greasy apron guy went and brought the soup, and much to Dr. Craddock's chagrin, it was gray-looking soup, the color of a mouse. Dr. Craddock got a small bit of that soup in his spoon, and he put the spoon to his lips, and yuck. Mouse-colored soup? No way. He could not eat the soup, but he put his hands around the bowl to keep himself warm. Then the door to the depot opened again. Shut the door, someone yelled. In came a woman who looked like she was struggling. Her coat was tattered. Her appearance was unkempt. She was, on her last legs, so to speak. She found what was perhaps the last available seat in that cafe. Greasy apron guy came over to her. "What do you want?" "A glass of water, please." He brought the water, took out his tablet. "Now, what do you have?" "I'm fine, just the water." "Well, you have to order, lady." "Well, I just want this glass of water." "Look," he said, "I have paying customers here. Now, what do you want?" "Well, just the water and some time to get warm." "Ma'am," he replied, "there are people that are paying. If you're not going to order, you're going to have to leave." And he got real loud about it. And all the noise in that cafe started to hush down, and everyone looked at the woman and that man in the greasy apron taking her order. The woman sighed and got up to leave. And then, almost as if it had been rehearsed, the person sitting next to her stood up to leave. Then a couple people in the booth behind them stood up. Then another booth stood up. Then the person next to Dr. Craddock stood up, and he felt compelled. He didn't know why they were standing. He stood up too. And the man with the greasy apron said, all right, she can stay." And everybody sat back down, and he brought her a bowl of soup on the house. And the place grew real quiet, except for the sound of the sipping of that gray soup. Dr. Craddock said to himself, "Maybe I'll try that soup again." And he took an entire spoonful this time, and he put that mouse-colored looking soup to his lips, and he tasted it, and he swallowed it, and you know what? It wasn't too bad. He had misjudged the soup. Now, how could soup that tasted so poorly suddenly taste so good? You know why. It had something to do with connection, right? With the power of connection in the cafe that day. Connection, you see, doesn't just change the taste of soup. In church, focusing on connection, it just might change how we welcome people, how we thank people, how we invite and befriend other people. All that can make a difference, or perhaps the difference, for anyone who walks through these doors. About 4 months after the shootings at Columbine High School back in 1999, a man in his late 20s began attending worship at Central Presbyterian Church in downtown Denver with some regularity. I'm told that he would come in just as the service was beginning. He would sit near the side and in the back of the sanctuary. He was always quite attentive, and he always departed as soon as the service ended. One Sunday, when he attended the early service, he was coming straight from work. That was when the pastor of the church learned that this young man was a firefighter. After worship, the visitor apologized for his non-church attire. He was in his uniform, and my colleague assured him it was just fine. That led to introductions. His name was Matt. He worked at a station not too far from the church, and he reported to my colleague that except for the random wedding or funeral, he had never been to church much in his life, which led to another conversation a couple weeks later as this young man uncharacteristically lingered after worship. There had been a baptism in worship that morning, so he asked about baptism. What was it? Why was it? What did it mean? He laughed and said that as someone who worked with fire hoses, he felt like he got baptized every single day. The conversation then turned to Columbine, about being a first responder to that tragedy, about what he saw that day. It made him think, he said. What was his life all about? Where was his life going? Mind you, it's not like Matt was doing something pointless with his life. He was a firefighter, for goodness sake. He was putting his life on the line for his community every single day. And yet, when Matt was baptized in worship a few weeks later, he told my colleague right before the service that it was like he heard something calling to him to a deeper identity, a greater purpose, a newfound connection that he had never experienced before. Have you ever considered how powerful and important the connections we make in here, in this place, can be? It wasn't just Jesus who said it, so did Paul. In our Romans text for today, Paul writes, "Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lonely. So far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all." Now, Paul's not just talking about the connections we make in here. He's talking about the connections we make out there. He's talking about what it means to be a follower of Christ in this world. Connection to Christ, according to Paul, is no small thing. Bless those who persecute you. Live peaceably with all. According to Paul, it means we have the power to overcome evil with good. That's what our connection to Christ is about. Do you believe that? Do you believe that the connections Christ builds gives us the power to overcome evil with good? I remember when I first heard the story of Immaculée. Immaculée is a survivor of the Rwandan genocide that took place in 1994. She was a Tutsi, a member of the tribe that was being killed by the hundreds of thousands. She is also a Christian, a member of the Roman Catholic Church. She survived those horrors almost 3 decades ago because a Hutu minister hid her and 6 other women in a tiny, rarely used bathroom in the corner of this minister's house. The size of the bathroom was worse than a prison cell. It measured 3 feet by 4 feet. Can you imagine being with 6 other people in a room 3 feet by 4 feet? They did it for 91 days, taking turns, standing and stretching. They could not bathe. Sometimes they ate bugs. One night, under the cover of darkness, the women escaped to a French compound and were rescued. Sometime later, during an interview, Immaculée was asked if she had the opportunity, would she take revenge? She said no. The interviewer did not believe her. After all, one of her Hutu neighbors, a man named Alex, had been responsible for murdering 2 members of Immaculée's family. When Alex was interviewed, he said he would have killed Immaculée too had he ever found her. "You weren't tempted to take his head and shake it?" the interviewer asked. "No," Immaculée responded. "I don't want them, after killing my family, to give me this luggage in my heart, to hold on to this anger. Revenge," she said, "only prolongs the pain." Now, how did she do it? I don't know how she did it. Maybe she didn't do it. I don't mean Immaculée fabricated her story of survival and forgiveness. I mean, maybe it was Christ at work in her. Christ who gave her the strength to stay alive. Christ who gave Immaculée the courage to show compassion to neighbors who committed such evil acts. Look, I hope you never have to come face to face with the kind of evil that Immaculée encountered. I do hope that you will see and know every day the power of Christ's connection to you. It is not a power to make a lot of money. It is not a power to live in your dream home. It's not even the power to have a comfortable life, as much as all of us may desire a comfortable life. It is the power to recognize that we are all cut from the same cloth and that we are all in need of God's abundant grace. "I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing." Friends, the good news of the gospel is that we are never apart from Christ, even when we don't realize that Christ is with us. Do you remember the gray soup? How many of you remember the gray soup? When I heard Dr. Craddock tell that story in a preaching conference many years ago, I remember him saying that it took him a moment to figure out what that gray soup tasted like. And then he remembered it. You know what he said it tasted like? He said it tasted like the bread of life. He said it tasted like the cup of salvation. Amen.